So every year, even after reading the instructions in the packet, there are students who have questions about how this assignment works or if the scale degree reference melodies they've chosen are appropriate. So I'm going to be doing two things in this video. The first thing is I'm going to be going through each scale degree and giving you a few options. These are things that either I've chosen, a GE has chosen, or that over the years a member of the class has said, this is what I use for this scale reference melody, and the whole class has gone, yeah, let's use that. So this is just kind of like greatest hits of scale reference degree melodies that you can choose from for your assignment. In the second half of the video, I'll be going over some frequently asked questions about this assignment, just kind of to anticipate the questions you may have before you begin. Do is one of the easier scale degrees to find a reference melody for because, of course, it's the tonic, and we've already had some in this class, such as Frere Jacques. Do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do. Students also really like to use Do a Deer from The Sound of Music, probably because it has Do in the title, so of course it's a super legit Do reference melody. Do, re, mi, do, mi. Students also really like to use Somewhere Over the Rainbow because it features a low Do and a high Do next to one another, so it works for both your low Do and your high Do reference melodies. Do, do, ti, sol, la, ti, do. And some students also like to use the main theme of Star Wars because it has Do followed by So it's really great for confirming where your tonic is. Do, so, fa, mi, re, do, so. Re reference melodies are harder to find than Do. I like to use Yesterday by Paul McCartney. It's the first two notes he sings. Re, do, do. It's a little upper neighbor figure from Re to Do. Some jazz musicians like to use the first note of Girl from Ipanema, which goes Re, ti, ti, la, re, ti, 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 la. Some students have a hard time finding a reference melody that starts right on Re, so they'll use the second pitch of something they know well instead, such as the second pitch of Frere Jacques. Do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do. That works as well. Mi reference melodies are super easy to find because Mi is such a colorful scale degree in the key. One that I've used in this class already is Ode to Joy, mi, fa, sol, so. That works well. Some students really like to use Three Blind Mice. Mi, re, do, mi, re, do. Those work fine. If you don't like those ones, you don't have to look very hard to find a better Mi reference melody that works for you. Fa reference melodies are some of the hardest to find because of the dissonant interval that Fa creates with Do, the interval of a perfect fourth. The melody that I like to use is a Mexican folk song called La Bamba, made famous in the 60s by Richie Valens, later in the 80s with a cover by Los Lobos. It goes la 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 bamba, or fa 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 mi do. Some students like to use the 80s hit Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie, which goes fa 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 mi do re mi. And some jazz musicians really like to use the song Killer Joe by Benny Golson, which goes fa mi so. Those three are all really great candidates where it's the first pitch. If you don't like any of those songs, you can find one on your own. So reference melodies along with Do and Mi are also fairly easy to find because it's a member of the tonic triad. I really like to use Happy Birthday. I've already used it in this class. So, la, so, do, ti. Some students really like to use Here Comes the Bride. So, do. And some students that used a melody that featured a perfect fifth as the opening two scale degrees, they like to use it for both their tonic and their fifth, such as Blackbird by the Beatles. Do, so. They'll hear that second scale degree as their so reference melody, or the already mentioned Star Wars. Do, so, fa, mi, re, do, so. So they'll use that so as their reference melody. There's also tons of great so reference melodies, so if you don't like these ones, you can find another one. Like Fa, it's hard to find a La reference melody, and for the same reason. We typically find them over subdominant chords, and the goal here is to try to find a scale reference melody that works over the tonic. The one that I like to use is Embraceable You by George and Ira Gershwin. It goes la, ti, do, re, so. There's also a lot of other songs of that era, kind of the Great American Songbook era or jazz standards, that also feature La over tonic harmony, such as Skylark or Nobody Else But Me. Now, there's a really great La reference melody that you guys all probably know because you probably saw this movie a ton when you were young, and that is Let It Go from the movie Frozen, which goes la ti do, so mi re. That one works really well and everybody seems to know it. So if you're struggling to find a law reference melody, use that one. So the melody I really like to use for T is the first pitch of O Danny Boy, which goes Ti do re mi. And for some reason, every year there's like a significant portion of the class that really likes to use the second pitch of a-ha's Take On Me, which goes Take On Me, or do ti do. And if the second pitch is your thing, you can also use the second pitch of Joy to the World, which goes do ti la so. Second pitch, do ti la so. So you're actually not required to find a high do reference melody, but some students find it really useful. So you can use the one I just sang, Joy to the World, as a high do reference melody. Works great. Do ti la so fa mi re do. Or some students like to use the second pitch of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Do ti so la ti do. So some students like to ask, do I need to use these particular scale reference melodies? And the answer is absolutely not. You need to find scale reference melodies that you know best. For example, I've had some students who are just total nerds for 80s pop music. Every single one of these has been like from an 80s pop song. Some jazz musicians really like to find melodies that come from that repertoire because they're playing it all the time. The same is true for R&B, for different kinds of folk music. Just the idea is whatever is already in your head, so you don't have to do extra work, that's what you want to pick. In fact, I even had an Eastern European student who was a singer, and she had all of these scale reference melodies of all this traditional music. I didn't know a single one, but I asked for YouTube links, and sure enough, they were all like great reference melodies for these songs I'd never even heard. So no, they don't have to be songs that I suggest. They don't even have to be songs I know. They need to be songs that are already in your head so you can rapidly identify these scale degrees. So even though in my experience this assignment has been really useful for a really big chunk of the class, every year I have students who come up to me and say, hey, you know, I don't really need to do this. I've got perfect pitch, or my relative pitch is so good that I don't need to use these in the way that you say we should be using them. Do I still need to do this assignment? And my answer is, for the assignment, all you have to do is literally find a melody associated with each scale degree, turn it in on week 8. It's the easiest points you'll ever get. You don't have to use this the way I suggest if you don't need it. This is just for the students that need it. Now, on the other hand, if you find this useful, especially those of you who may be struggling with starting pitch or who may be struggling with sight singing in terms of establishing the tonic, if you're in that group, make this part of what you do every day. You'll notice that in the recommended practice, I mention it quite a bit in terms of just, singing these reference melodies and then associating them with sequentials, associating them with your dictation and your sight singing. Just make it part of what you do if you find it useful. If you don't find it useful, you can just kind of phone in the assignment. That's totally fine. So one way that students sometimes get off on this assignment is they'll remember back in high school they had certain melodies that they would associate with intervals. And it's important to note that intervals are not the same as scale degrees. We're going to be studying intervals next week, and intervals are actually the distance between scale degrees. So for example, a major second may occur between do and re, between re and mi, between fa and so, between so and la, between la and ti. That's not the same as saying a second scale degree. So for your second scale degree reference melody or your re reference melody, you want to make sure that that melody actually starts on re rather than that melody actually has a second in it. So if Yesterday by the Beatles happens to be your major second interval reference, it actually works here because it goes from re to do. So it's not only the interval of a major second, but it also starts on the second scale degree. It often doesn't work with other melodies though. For example, if you use My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, if that was your major sixth interval melody, that's not going to work for your sixth scale degree reference melody because it doesn't actually contain la until the very end of the melody. So you'll notice if you sit at a keyboard and play a tonic triad, or if you do it with a drone app, you'll note that My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean goes so, mi, re, do. So it would be a good so or mi reference melody, but it would not be a good sixth scale degree reference melody. This can be sometimes confusing, so we'll be answering questions over this over the next couple of weeks. That's one of the reasons you've got like 5 weeks to do this.